Hey there, welcome to Shadow Archives. I have some news for you. A while back, I asked where you'd prefer ads, and you know what? The response was clear. Most of you said no ads at all would be better. So I've made a decision. I've turned off monetization completely. From now on, it's ad-free, just like when I started this channel. If you do see any ads, that's YouTube placing them automatically, not me. From my side, no interruptions, just pure storytelling. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. I still have a hard time talking about this one, even now. Not because it sounds unbelievable or dramatic, but because of how real it was and how much it changed me afterward. It didn't involve ghosts or shadows or unexplained figures. It was something far more grounded and, in a way, that made it worse. It happened when I was 15, and even though years have passed, it still sits heavy in my chest. It was around 3 in the morning. I was asleep in my basement room. The basement had been converted into a bedroom, and it was technically separate from the rest of the house. The door to my room locked from the outside, not the inside, which at the time felt like a weird quirk of the renovation. I never imagined how important that detail would become. I woke up to a sound that didn't immediately register as danger. It was moaning, low, strained, full of pain. At first, my half-asleep brain tried to explain it away. I assumed I was dreaming, or that it was just some noise from upstairs carrying through the vents, or maybe I was imagining it entirely. My room was laid out in such a way that from my bed, I couldn't see the couch in the basement common area. The wall blocked my view, so I couldn't tell if anyone was actually there. I lay still, listening, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But it didn't stop. The moaning continued. It sounded like someone in agony, not yelling, not screaming, just this constant, miserable sound that didn't belong in the middle of the night. I remember feeling annoyed more than afraid at first. I tried to roll over and go back to sleep, telling myself my brain was playing tricks on me. A few minutes passed. 5, maybe. The sound was still there. I leaned up slightly in bed, just enough to look toward the edge of the wall. From that angle, I could see legs, shoes. Someone was lying on the couch. My first thought was that a friend must have stayed over and passed out. A friend had been over earlier that night, and the shoes looked similar. I remember thinking, annoyed but relieved, that he must be sick or hurt or just making noise in his sleep. Then my brain caught up. That wasn't my friend. I leaned up farther, my heart starting to pound. I could see more of him now. He wasn't Greek like my friend. He was Hispanic, a complete stranger. His clothes were unfamiliar. His posture was wrong. Everything about the situation suddenly snapped into focus all at once. There was a man in my basement. I froze. I sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably around 30 seconds. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. I had a 3-inch knife on my nightstand. I remember my first instinct was pure animal fear mixed with anger. Part of me wanted to grab it and attack him while he hadn't noticed me yet. The room was weirdly quiet, except for his moaning. He didn't seem aware I was there. But then another thought cut through the panic. My door locks from the outside. That realization changed everything. If I left my room, even for a second, and he got inside, I would be trapped. There would be no way to lock him out. I wouldn't be able to protect myself. Suddenly, fighting didn't seem brave anymore. It seemed stupid. I decided to run. The moment I moved, he heard me. His head snapped toward my room. The moaning stopped instantly. He got up and started moving toward me fast. I don't remember what his face looked like in that moment. I just remember the sudden, sharp terror when I realized he was chasing me. I bolted out of my room, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I sprinted for the door, adrenaline taking over. I reached it first and slammed it shut, locking it from the outside. I could hear him hit the door almost immediately after. I didn't stop to think. I ran. I sprinted up 2 flights of stairs, barefoot, barely feeling the steps under me. I burst into my parents' room, frantic, yelling that there was a man in the basement. I was shaking, gasping for air, barely able to get the words out. They didn't believe me. At first, they thought I had woken up from a nightmare. It was 3 a.m. I was 15. They assumed I was confused, half asleep, maybe having a bad dream. I remember the frustration, the fear turning into desperation as I tried to convince them. Eventually, they agreed to come downstairs with me. As we walked toward the basement, I felt sick. I kept thinking, what if he's gone? What if they don't see anything and think I made it all up? What if he's hiding? Then, right as we approached my room, something slammed into the door from the inside. The edge of a 10-pound weight broke through the door. Wood splintered. The sound was loud and violent. There was no denying it anymore. Someone was in there. Someone real. Someone strong enough and desperate enough to try to break their way out. My mother immediately reached for the phone and called 911. My father didn't hesitate. He told me to stay back and ran upstairs to the middle floor. We had this mostly decorative suit of armor in the living room, something my family had always joked about. He pulled a broadsword from it like this was some medieval movie instead of real life. He handed my mom the phone and told me to fetch the cavalry saber from the umbrella stand. Yes, we had one of those too. Weird family. I remember my hands shaking as I grabbed it. Everything felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's story. My father stood there with an actual sword, guarding the hallway, while my mother spoke calmly but urgently to the dispatcher. We waited. Every second felt like an hour. We could hear the man inside my room, still moving, still making noise. The door creaked and groaned under the pressure of his attempts to escape. I remember thinking about how thin that door really was, how flimsy it suddenly seemed. After what felt like forever but was probably only 5 minutes, the police arrived. They moved quickly and professionally. They opened the door and rushed in. I didn't see much of what happened next. I stayed back with my parents, heart pounding, ears ringing. They arrested him without much trouble. The man was completely out of his mind. Drugged, they said. PCP. He wasn't coherent. He wasn't aggressive anymore, just confused and barely aware of what was happening. Apparently, he had gotten into the house by diving through a basement window. Glass everywhere. I take sleeping medication, which explained why the sound of the window shattering hadn't woken me up. The police told us something else that stuck with me. Because I had locked him in my room and prevented him from leaving, it technically counted as a citizen's arrest. That detail felt absurd at the time, almost darkly funny in a way that made my stomach twist. The immediate danger was over, but that wasn't the end of it. A few months later, I was diagnosed with PTSD. The nightmares came first, then the flashbacks, the hallucinations. I would hear sounds that weren't there, see shapes move out of the corner of my eye, wake up convinced someone was in my room again. Sleep became the enemy. The fear didn't fade with time the way people tell you it will. It changed shape. It settled into my body, into my reactions, into the way I see the world. But the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the shame. Shame that I froze. Shame that my first instinct was violence. Shame that I didn't scream immediately. Shame that I needed help. Or shame that something like this broke me when other people go through worse. Even now, that shame is hard to shake. People talk about trauma like it's a single moment, but it isn't. It's a long echo, a memory that keeps replaying itself when you least expect it. A door slamming in your mind over and over again. What happened that night didn't just scare me, it changed me. And that's the part I'm still learning how to live with. About 2 years ago, I went through one of the worst periods of my life, and even now it's hard to think about without my chest tightening. It wasn't something supernatural or unexplained like some of the other stories I've shared. What made it terrifying was that it was completely real, completely human, and completely out of my control. My ex and I had a brutal breakup. Not the kind where people drift apart quietly, but the kind full of screaming arguments, crying, accusations, and words you can never take back. Over time, it became clear that she had serious emotional issues I hadn't fully seen while we were together. There was a lot of anger in her, a lot of instability, and a lot of lying that only came to light once everything started falling apart. What made it even stranger was that she was the one who broke things off. And not once, but multiple times. Each time she'd leave, come back, leave again. When I finally accepted it and told her that it was over for good and that she needed to move out and move on, something flipped in her. She became absolutely furious. It was like me accepting the breakup took away something she needed, like control or validation. Around 3 weeks after the final breakup, I started seeing someone new. It wasn't rushed or reckless. It was calm, healthy, and honestly the first time in a long while that I felt grounded. When my ex found out, it enraged her. She took it as a personal betrayal, even though she was the one who had ended things. One day she showed up at my place to collect some belongings she had left behind. I thought it would be awkward and uncomfortable, but manageable. I couldn't have been more wrong. She came inside and told me to sit down on the bed. Her tone wasn't frantic at first. It was controlled, cold. She handed me a note and told me to read it out loud. I looked at it and immediately knew it was bad. It wasn't a letter, it was a speech, a list of insults, accusations, and pure venom. It talked about how I was incapable of love, how I was a terrible person, how I had ruined her life, how I deserved to die. I refused to read it. That's when she started screaming, not crying, screaming. She demanded that I read it over and over, her voice rising, her face twisted with rage. I was exhausted, emotionally beaten down, and I just wanted the situation to end. I remember thinking that if I read it, maybe she would finally leave. So I did. I read the whole thing out loud, every awful word, my voice shaking, my throat tight. When I finished, I looked up at her, expecting the confrontation to be over. Instead, she reached into her purse. She pulled out a gun. Loaded. Time did something strange in that moment. Everything slowed down, but my thoughts raced so fast I couldn't keep track of them. My body felt heavy and light at the same time, like I might pass out or bolt, but I couldn't do either. She sat there holding the gun and started talking. She said she knew the law. She knew she'd be caught. She knew exactly what prison she'd go to and how long she'd be there. She said she was fine with it because once she pulled the trigger, I'd be gone. Off the planet. That's how she phrased it. For about 15 minutes, she sat there trying to work herself up to doing it. 15 minutes doesn't sound long. But when you're sitting in front of someone holding a gun and talking about killing you, it stretches into something unbearable. Every second felt like it might be the last one I'd ever experience. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the bed to steady myself. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't fight. I cried. Tears were streaming down my face as I tried to talk to her, to reach whatever part of her was still human. I told her she wasn't a killer. I told her this wasn't who she was. I told her that if she did this, it would destroy her life and everyone who loved her. I told her she needed to leave and go live her life without me, that killing me wouldn't give her peace. I don't know which words mattered or if any of them did. I don't know if it was something I said or if something inside her finally broke through the rage. But eventually she lowered the gun. She stood up, still shaking, still furious, and left. When the door closed behind her, I collapsed. I don't remember standing up or moving. I just remember sitting there afterward, staring at nothing, trying to understand how close I had come to dying in my own bedroom at the hands of someone I once loved. That experience changed me, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, in a quiet, lasting way. It shattered my sense of safety, my trust in my own judgment, and my belief that emotional volatility is harmless just because it's emotional. I realized how thin the line can be between anger and violence, and how quickly things can spiral when someone feels like they've lost control. I survived, but it left scars that aren't visible. Loud arguments still make my chest tighten, sudden movements still make me flinch, and sometimes when I'm alone and it's quiet, my mind goes back to those 15 minutes and wonders how easily they could have ended differently. There was nothing supernatural about this story, and that's exactly why it still scares the hell out of me. I have had a few strange or paranormal things happen to me throughout my life, but most of them were small and easy to brush off. They were the kind of moments you think about once or twice and then forget. Nothing that really shook me, but there is one experience that still sits deep in my mind, even years later, and no matter how much time passes, it has never truly left me. About 4 years ago, I was finishing up my freshman year of college. I lived in the dorms, and honestly, up until that point, it had been a great experience. I had an amazing roommate, the kind you instantly click with, and we got along so well that living together felt natural. We studied together, hung out late into the night, joked around, and made what felt like lifelong memories. College life felt exciting and full of energy, and I genuinely enjoyed being there. Toward the end of my last semester, though, something started to feel different. It is hard to explain exactly when it began, because nothing obvious had changed. The people were the same. We were still loud, still laughing, still being our usual college selves. But there was this heavy feeling that started to follow us whenever we walked into our hall. It was like the air itself felt wrong. Every time I stepped through the entrance, I felt a deep sense of dread settle in my chest for no clear reason. At first, all of us brushed it off. Finals were coming up, stress levels were high, and everyone was exhausted. We joked about how the building just felt depressing because of exams and lack of sleep. But deep down, at least for me, it felt like more than stress. It felt like something was watching, something unseen but present. I never said that out loud because it sounded ridiculous even to me. One night, after hours of studying, I decided to take a shower. I figured I would clean up, get a little refreshed, and then try to sleep for a few hours before class. It was late, and most people were either asleep or still studying in their rooms. The hall was quiet, which was unusual but not alarming. Before I continue, it helps to understand the layout of our hall and the bathroom, because it plays a huge role in what happened. Our floor was divided into multiple halls, and each hall had 4 rooms. Each room held 2 students, except for one that was sometimes reserved for an RA. At the end of the hall was a massive steel door with a small window in it, so the door always made the place feel more like a prison block than a college dorm. Directly across from that door was the bathroom. The bathroom itself was unsettling even on a normal day. When you walked in, there were 2 sets of sinks immediately on either side. 2 sinks on the left and 2 on the right. Above them were large mirrors facing each other, creating this endless reflection effect that went on forever. If you stared into it too long, it almost made you dizzy. Past the sinks on the left side were 2 urinals and a toilet stall. On the right side were 2 shower stalls. What made it worse was how the mirrors worked. If you stood at the left sinks and looked into the mirror, you could clearly see the shower stalls if the doors were open. If you stood at the right sinks, You could see the reflection of the showers from the opposite mirror. No matter where you stood, it felt like you could always see more than you wanted to. The bathroom door was just as heavy and industrial as the hall door. Thick steel, small window, barely letting any light through. The door was usually held open by a large wooden wedge. It was heavy enough that you could not move it by accident. If the door closed, it was because someone intentionally forced it. That night, I was completely alone in the bathroom. I remember feeling slightly on edge, but I told myself it was just because I was tired and overstimulated. I had consumed a ridiculous amount of caffeine. Red Bull, Adderall, coffee, anything to keep me awake for finals. I tried to laugh it off in my head as I got ready to shower. I placed my clean clothes on the right side sink so I could easily reach around the shower stall and grab them afterward. As I was doing that, I happened to glance up into the mirror. At first, I didn't notice anything clearly, but something felt off, like a movement that didn't belong. In the distance, reflected deep within the mirror, I saw something faint. It almost looked like a shimmer, like heat waves in the air, but darker. It was inside the reflection of the shower stall. I stared at it, confused, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As I watched, the thing began to move closer, not in a normal way, but like it was jumping from one layer of reflection to the next. It would appear in the farthest reflection, then suddenly be one layer closer, then another. Slowly, at first. I felt uneasy, but I tried to rationalize it. I told myself my eyes were tired, that my brain was playing tricks on me after too much caffeine and no sleep. But then it started moving faster. Each jump brought it closer, and with every movement my heart began to race harder. I could start to see more detail, but it was still unclear. It looked like a dark mass, almost like it was covered in hair. I remember my body going stiff. I couldn't move. I couldn't even look away. I felt glued to the spot, staring into that mirror. By the time it reached the fourth layer of reflection, I finally saw it clearly, and I wish more than anything that I hadn't. What I thought was hair wasn't hair at all. It was something like a long, flowing veil. It moved in a way that didn't feel natural, almost like it was floating underwater. You could partially see through it, but from the torso down, it was completely solid black, just emptiness. The face is the hardest part to describe. It was human, but not really. The shape was wrong somehow, familiar yet completely alien. There were eyes, and they were black, but they glowed in a way that didn't make sense. Not bright, not reflective, but glowing from within. The kind of glow that feels alive. I only saw it clearly for maybe a second, but that second has replayed in my head thousands of times. It is burned into my memory in a way I can't escape. Suddenly, the lights went out. The bathroom was plunged into complete darkness. At the same time, I heard the door slam shut with incredible force. The sound echoed through the room, loud and final. I couldn't see the thing anymore, but somehow that made it worse. My mind filled in the gaps. I ran to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't move. It was stuck. Panic took over completely. My breathing became shallow and fast. Then, out of nowhere, a strong metallic smell filled the air. The smell of blood. It was overwhelming, thick and suffocating. After that, everything went blank. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. According to my RA, he had gone to use the bathroom sometime after all this happened. When he walked in, he found me collapsed in the shower stall. My shirt was soaked in blood from a massive nosebleed. He tried talking to me, asking what happened, but apparently I was completely out of it. The only thing I kept saying was, "It saw me." Over and over, I was panicking, screaming, completely incoherent. He had no choice but to call an ambulance. On the way to the hospital, now I was so agitated and terrified that the paramedics had to sedate me just to keep me calm. I started coming to around the time my parents arrived. They were terrified, of course, seeing me like that. I asked them what happened, trying to piece things together. The doctors told us they believed I had a seizure. They ran CAT scans once I was calm enough, but they found no evidence of seizure activity, no signs of epilepsy, no abnormalities at all. Epilepsy doesn't run in my family. I had taken Adderall many times before and even after that incident, and I had never experienced anything remotely similar. No hallucinations, no seizures, nothing. To this day, I can't look into a mirror for more than a minute. Being in a room with mirrors for too long makes my chest tighten and my vision blur. I start shaking. Sometimes I completely break down. I've been in therapy for almost 3 years because of this. I've talked to religious leaders from different backgrounds, searching for answers. Most of them give the same response, telling me to turn to God in times of fear. None of them recognize what I described as anything demonic or evil. They just don't know what to make of it. The strangest part is that before my experience, there were no reports of activity in that dorm. No stories, no rumors. And since I left, there haven't been any either. Nothing before, nothing after. It was just that one night, one isolated incident, and somehow it changed me forever. Now, a small pause. 3 stories. No interruptions. No ads stealing the moment. Just you and the darkness. Exactly the way it should be. You made this happen. You told me what mattered, and I listened. I chose your experience over everything else. Here's something I rarely say. This channel exists because of people who feel something real when they hear these stories. People who come back in the quiet hours because this place gives them something they can't find anywhere else. If that's you, if even one story stayed with you after it ended, then you already know this is worth protecting. The link is in the description, in the bio, and pinned in the first comment. Shadow Archives lives because you choose to keep it alive. Now, let's continue. When this happened, I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't dramatic or terrifying in the way some paranormal stories are. There were no shadows, no strange figures, no sudden noises in the night. But over time, the slow buildup of it all became deeply unsettling in a way that still bothers me when I think about it. I had just moved to Montreal, and like anyone relocating to a new country, I needed a new phone number. I signed up with a Canadian provider, got my new number, and didn't think twice about it. It was just another step in starting a new chapter of my life. New city, new routines, new experiences. Everything felt fresh and exciting. Not long after getting settled, I started receiving phone calls and text messages in French. At first, I assumed they were wrong numbers or maybe automated messages. I didn't speak much French at the time, but I knew enough to understand that the callers were asking for someone named Nina. The first few times I brushed it off. Wrong numbers happen all the time, especially when you get a new phone number. I replied politely when I could, saying they had the wrong number. Sometimes I ignored the calls if I didn't recognize the number. It didn't seem like a big deal. But then it kept happening. Over the next several months, the messages and calls continued. Not every day, but often enough that I noticed a pattern. Sometimes it would be a text. Sometimes it would be a call. The people on the other end were always French-speaking, and they always asked for Nina. Some of them sounded confused when I said I wasn't her. Others sounded frustrated, like they had been trying to reach her for a long time. But what made it more uncomfortable was the timing. These calls didn't always come during normal hours. I'd get them early in the morning, late at night, sometimes at hours when no one should reasonably be calling a stranger. A few times my phone rang so late that it startled me awake. Each time it was the same question. Were they speaking to Nina? At first, I joked about it to friends. I laughed it off as some weird mix-up. I even started referring to Nina like she was a ghost roommate who refused to leave me alone. But as the months went on, the humor faded. The consistency of it was strange. 8 months is a long time for wrong number calls to continue, especially when multiple people are involved. It felt like this number wasn't just recently reassigned. It felt like people genuinely believed Nina should still be answering it. Then came the call that changed everything. It was an April morning. I was still in bed, half asleep, when my phone rang. The number was withheld, which immediately caught my attention. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. A woman spoke in French. Her voice was calm, professional, and serious. She asked for Nina. I told her, again, that she had the wrong number. There was a pause. Then she told me she was with the Montreal police. That alone was enough to make my heart jump. She explained that they had been trying to contact Nina and that she had been missing for over a year. She asked if I knew her, if I had any information, if I had recently been in contact with her. I told her the truth. I had no idea who Nina was. I had only just moved to Montreal. Yeah, I had received calls and texts asking for her, but I had never met her, never spoken to her, and didn't know anything about her life. The officer thanked me for my time and ended the call. I lay there in bed, staring at my ceiling, my phone still in my hand. My mind was racing. The idea that I had been receiving calls meant for a missing person for months. Without knowing it made my skin crawl. This wasn't just a wrong number anymore. This was someone real, someone who had disappeared. And somehow I had her phone number. At first, I felt angry. I remember thinking, almost bitterly, about my phone provider. Good job, Fido, reassigning the number of a missing person without a second thought. But that anger quickly gave way to something else. Unease. Confusion. A strange sense of guilt, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about Nina. Who was she? How old was she? Why were so many people trying to reach her? And how had her number ended up with me if she was still considered missing? A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to submit an inquiry through the Montreal police website. I didn't expect much. I just wanted to know if there was anything I should be aware of. If I was somehow holding on to a number connected to an active missing person case, I felt like I should at least understand the situation. In my message, I explained that I had received a call from someone claiming to be with the Montreal police, asking for Nina. I told them that I had been receiving calls and texts for her for months, and that I wanted to know if there was anything I should know or do. Then I waited. Weeks passed with no response. Part of me hoped I wouldn't hear back. Another part of me kept checking my email, wondering if there was more to this story than I already knew. Eventually, I received a reply. The message was brief, cold even. It confirmed that yes, Nina was missing, but no, they could not share any further details. That was it. No explanation, no reassurance, no guidance, just confirmation that the person whose calls I had been receiving for months was real and was still missing. That response unsettled me more than the original phone call. After that, I tried doing my own research. I searched missing persons databases for Quebec, Montreal, and Canada as a whole. I scrolled through pages of cases, filtering by date, name, age. I searched for Nina in every way I could think of. I found nothing. No Nina listed as missing within the past year. No case that matched what the officer had told me. No articles, no alerts. Nothing that explained why the police were actively trying to contact her through my number. That's when the situation started to feel truly wrong. If Nina was missing and the police were involved, why was there no public record? Why were people still calling her number months after it had been reassigned? Why had I never received a voicemail clearly explaining the situation? Even after the police call, the texts and calls didn't immediately stop. A few still came in afterward. Each one felt heavier than the last. Every time my phone buzzed, I wondered who it was this time. A friend, a family member, someone desperately trying to reach a person who no longer answered. I started to feel like I was standing in the shadow of someone else's life, like I had inherited a fragment of a story that wasn't meant for me, a story that had no clear ending. Eventually, the calls slowed down. Then they stopped, but the feeling never fully went away. To this day, I still think about Nina. I think about the idea that her number lived on, passing into my hands while she herself had vanished. I think about how many people tried to reach her, unaware that their messages were going to a stranger. And I think about that moment, half asleep in bed, when a police officer told me she had been missing for over a year. It wasn't terrifying in a traditional sense. There was no single moment of fear, just a slow, creeping realization that sometimes, without realizing it, you can step into the aftermath of something tragic. And all you're left with are unanswered calls, withheld numbers, and a name that no longer belongs to anyone you can reach. And that, in its own quiet way, is deeply unsettling. This one still hits me in a strange way when I think about it, not because anything supernatural happened, but because of how close it came to going very, very wrong. It's one of those moments where, afterward, you realize how thin the line was between a scary story and a tragic one. At the time, I was staying over at my girlfriend's house. We were together back then, and it wasn't unusual for me to crash there or hang around while she and her roommates were out. That particular day, she and her roommates had all gone to class. I had stayed behind because I was badly hungover and honestly just wanted to sleep it off in a quiet house. The house itself was nothing special, a normal place in a normal neighborhood. I had been there plenty of times and felt completely comfortable. I was laying in bed, half asleep, drifting in and out, not really thinking about anything. Just that dull, heavy feeling you get when your head is pounding and your body feels like it's made of cement. My girlfriend had a small Pomeranian, and her roommate, who was also her cousin, had a Chihuahua. I never really knew how to spell it, but it was tiny and loud, like most Chihuahuas are. Normally, the dogs would bark at random noises or get excited over nothing, so hearing them make noise wasn't unusual. But this time was different. Suddenly, both dogs completely lost it. Not normal barking, not playful noise. This was full-on panic, high-pitched yelps, frantic sounds like they were terrified and in distress. It was coming from the hallway outside the bedroom, the kind of noise that immediately puts you on edge, because animals don't sound like that unless something is very wrong. At first, I just lay there trying to process it through the fog of my hangover. I thought maybe they were fighting each other, or maybe someone had come to the door and they were freaking out like dogs usually do. But it didn't stop. If anything, it sounded worse by the second. That's when concern kicked in. I got out of bed and stood up. I should mention, because it matters to the story, that I'm a big guy. I'm about 6'1", very athletic, muscular. At the time I was in good shape, but I was also half asleep, hungover, and standing there in nothing but my boxers. No shirt, no shoes, no weapon, just me. I walked toward the bedroom door and opened it, stepping into the hallway, and that's when everything stopped making sense. Right there in the hallway were two men I had never seen before. They looked rough, not like friends stopping by, not like people who belonged there. They were crouched down, holding the dogs, trying to physically restrain them and shut them up. One had his hands over the Pomeranian, the other was grabbing the Chihuahua. For a split second, my brain didn't know what to do with the image. I genuinely froze, not out of fear, but confusion. There's this weird delay when something happens that your mind can't immediately categorize. I remember thinking, are these her friends? Did someone come by for some reason I don't know about? Why are they touching the dogs? That moment of confusion probably lasted less than a second. Then instinct took over. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I didn't yell. I just said, "What's up?" But the way it came out shocked even me. It was harsh, aggressive, low, and firm. There was no friendliness in it at all. It was the kind of tone that says, "You are not welcome here." The effect was immediate. Both of them looked up, eyes wide, and then they bolted. They didn't say a word. They didn't threaten me. They didn't hesitate. They just ran. Full sprint straight out of the house. I didn't chase them. I didn't try to grab them. I didn't even move forward. I stepped backward instead and slammed the bedroom door shut. And then I just stood there. My heart was pounding, but it hadn't fully caught up yet. I remember standing in that room, staring at the door, trying to process what had just happened. Burglars. They were burglars. They had broken into the house while everyone was gone, and I had been laying in bed the entire time. The realization hit me all at once. Now I walked over to the window in the bedroom and looked outside. That's when I saw the Pomeranian. It was outside, trotting around like nothing had happened. That made my stomach drop. They had taken the dog outside, or it had escaped during the chaos. Either way, it confirmed how real the situation was. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. After a moment, I opened the bedroom door again and carefully checked the house. Every room, every corner, slowly, cautiously. The house was empty. They were gone. No sign of them anywhere. A little while later, I found out that the neighbors had picked up the Pomeranian and were keeping it safe. That was a relief. But the Chihuahua was missing. My girlfriend's cousin and her cousin's boyfriend were frantic when they found out. They searched everywhere. Eventually, thankfully, they found the Chihuahua later on, unharmed. I don't remember all the details of where it ended up, just that it was okay. No one was hurt. And that's the part that still makes me pause, because it could have gone so differently. Those guys could have had knives. They could have had guns. I was unarmed, half asleep, and wearing boxers. If my tone had come out differently, if I had sounded scared instead of aggressive, if I had hesitated longer, they might not have run. They might have panicked. They might have attacked me, or worse. It scares me how close it came without me realizing it at the time. At the moment, it almost felt unreal, like a scene from someone else's life. Only afterward did the weight of it settle in. The what-ifs, the delayed fear, the realization that I was incredibly lucky. I didn't feel brave afterward. I didn't feel tough. I felt shaken. I kept replaying it in my head. The dogs panicking, opening the door, seeing strangers in the house, that split second of confusion, the sound of their footsteps as they ran. I also thought about how random it was. If I had gone to class that day, if I had left earlier, if I had been asleep just a little longer, those guys would have had more time. They might have taken more, or hurt the dogs, or worse. People talk about fight or flight like it's a clean, heroic thing. But in reality, it's messy and confusing. You don't feel like a hero in the moment. You feel disoriented. You feel wrong-footed. You react before your brain fully understands what's happening. I'm still grateful nothing worse happened. Grateful the dogs were okay. Grateful my girlfriend and her roommates weren't home. Grateful those guys chose to run instead of fight. Because when I think back on it now, the scariest part isn't that burglars broke into the house. It's knowing how easily that moment could have turned into something I wouldn't be able to walk away from. I never told anyone in my house about this, and even now it feels strange to put it into words. It wasn't dramatic in the way horror stories usually are. There was no build-up, no warning, no shape stepping out of the shadows. Just one sound in the dark that instantly convinced every part of my body that something was very wrong. This happened on a normal day, doing something completely ordinary. I was doing laundry in the basement. Our basement was old, unfinished in places, and laid out in a way that always felt a little off. The laundry room itself was separated from the rest of the basement by a wall and a door. It was a small room, just big enough for the washer, dryer, a folding table, and some shelves. It had its own light, so once you were inside, it felt contained and manageable. The rest of the basement was another story. To get upstairs, you had to leave the laundry room, go through the larger open area of the basement, and then reach the staircase at the far end. That open area wasn't pitch black normally, but it relied on a single overhead light. When that light was on, everything felt fine. When it wasn't, the basement turned into a cavern of shadows and half-seen shapes. Old boxes, support beams, pipes along the ceiling, random stored furniture, all of it blurred together into something that felt bigger than it was. While I was down there switching loads, I heard a sharp pop. The light in the other part of the basement blew out. I remember standing still for a second, listening to the sudden silence that followed. The laundry room light was still on, humming softly, but beyond the door it was now completely dark. Not dim, not shadowy. Dark enough that I couldn't see anything past the doorway. I swore under my breath and told myself it was no big deal. Light bulbs blow all the time. I just needed to finish what I was doing and then deal with it later. Still, I felt that familiar unease creep in. I hate walking through dark basements, always have. There's something about being underground, surrounded by concrete and dirt and old things, that makes your imagination work against you. Every sound feels louder. Every shadow feels intentional. I tried to shake that off, reminding myself I was an adult, not a scared kid. I stayed in the laundry room longer than I needed to. I folded clothes slowly. I checked my phone. I rearranged things that didn't need rearranging. Anything to delay having to open that door and walk through the darkness. The whole time, I kept glancing at the doorway, where the darkness pressed up against the light like a solid wall. Eventually, I ran out of excuses. I turned off the washer, grabbed the basket, and stood in front of the door. I told myself I would just walk straight across, not stop, not look around, and go up the stairs. It would take maybe 10 seconds. I opened the door. The darkness on the other side felt heavier than I expected, like it had weight to it. The laundry room light spilled out behind me, creating a weak rectangle of light that barely reached a few feet into the basement. Everything beyond that was swallowed up completely. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. That was my first mistake. Now the only light was behind me, and it faded quickly as I moved forward. The farther I walked, the less I could see. My eyes tried to adjust, but there was nothing to adjust to. The darkness didn't soften, it just stayed thick and absolute. I took a few steps, then a few more. Every sound suddenly felt amplified. My footsteps echoed faintly on the concrete floor. Somewhere above me, the house creaked as it settled. Pipes made a soft ticking noise as they cooled. All normal basement sounds I had heard 1,000 times before. But in the dark, they felt different. I was about halfway across the basement when it happened. Right behind me, close enough that it felt personal, I heard a loud cackle. Not a laugh, not a chuckle, a cackle. It was sharp and ugly and full of intent. The kind of sound people make when they imitate a witch, except this wasn't exaggerated or playful. It sounded old, hoarse, like whoever or whatever made it had been screaming or smoking or laughing like that for decades. Imagine a witch's laugh dragged down into a deeper register, roughened, thick, wet at the edges. That's what I heard, clear as day, right behind me. Every hair on my body stood up at once. My heart slammed so hard, it felt like it skipped a beat entirely. I didn't stop to think. I didn't turn around. I didn't even fully process what I had heard. I ran. I bolted for the stairs like my life depended on it. I don't remember my feet hitting the ground, just the sensation of movement and panic. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping, my breath coming out in short, sharp gasps. I didn't stop until I was at the top, in the light, with the basement door slammed shut behind me. I stood there shaking, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no more laughter, no sound at all from below. Just the normal, quiet house, the hum of appliances, the faint noise of traffic outside, the world continuing exactly as it always had. I stood there for a long time, my hand still on the door handle, my chest tight and my pulse racing. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that stress and darkness had made my brain fill in something that wasn't really there. But the sound had been too clear, too specific, too close. If it had been a noise from upstairs or outside or even farther away in the basement, I might have accepted a rational explanation. But this wasn't distant, it wasn't muffled, it wasn't ambiguous, it was right behind me. I didn't go back down. I waited until my father got home later that day. When he asked why the basement light was out, I just said the bulb had blown. He went down, replaced it, flipped the switch, and the basement filled with light again like nothing had ever happened. I watched from the top of the stairs. Nothing looked out of place. No signs of anyone else having been there. No movement. No shadows where they shouldn't be. Just boxes, walls, and concrete. Just a basement. After that, I went down there plenty of times. I did laundry. I grabbed things from storage. I walked across that same spot where I had heard the sound. I never heard the cackle again, not once. That might sound comforting, but in a way, it made it worse. If it had happened more than once, I could have tried to find a pattern, a cause, some explanation. But it didn't repeat. It stood alone, like a single crack in reality that sealed itself immediately after. I never told anyone in my family about it. Not my father, not my mother, not anyone. I didn't want to sound ridiculous. I didn't want someone to laugh it off and tell me I scared myself. I didn't want to hear explanations that didn't fit what I knew I had experienced. So I kept it to myself. Even now, years later, I can still hear it if I think about it long enough. That hoarse, ugly cackle exploding out of the darkness behind me. I still avoid turning off lights in basements until I'm already at the stairs. I still walk a little faster when I'm down there alone, and sometimes when the house is quiet and the lights are low, I think about how easily something can happen once and never again, and still change the way you move through the world forever. Whatever made that sound doesn't matter as much as the fact that it made it at all, because for one moment in the dark, something let me know it was there, and then it never did again. I used to live way out in the country, not completely isolated, but far enough that nights were quiet in a way that felt heavy. We had a few neighbors scattered around, but there was a lot of land between houses, a lot of darkness once the sun went down. In the summertime, that quiet stretched on forever. Crickets, wind in the trees, the occasional distant sound that you couldn't quite place. It was the kind of place where nights felt longer than they should. Summer also meant very late nights for me. Back then, the internet was still something you shared, not something you carried around in your pocket. We had one computer in the house, and it wasn't in my room. It was set up in the guest bedroom on the opposite side of the house. Our house was wide, not tall, so to get from my bedroom to the computer, I had to pass through several rooms. There was no shortcut. If I wanted to go online, I had to make that walk every time. I didn't mind it most nights. I was a night owl, always had been. When everyone else went to sleep, that was when I felt most awake. I'd stay up chatting with friends, browsing random websites, doing whatever people did online back then to kill time. It felt like my own private world, especially when the rest of the house was dark and quiet. That night was no different at first. It was around 2 in the morning. The house was completely still. My parents were asleep in their bedroom, which sat between the kitchen and the living room. The only light in the house was the glow from the computer screen in the guest bedroom. I remember feeling relaxed, comfortable, half lost in whatever conversation I was having. At some point, I realized I needed to grab something from my room. I don't remember what it was. Maybe a charger, maybe a notebook, maybe just something dumb I convinced myself I needed. It didn't feel important at the time, and it still doesn't. What matters is that I stood up, pushed my chair back quietly, and opened the guest bedroom door. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the darkness felt thicker. The lights were off everywhere except the guest bedroom, and once I closed that door behind me, the glow disappeared. I didn't turn any lights on. I didn't want to wake my parents. I knew the house well enough to walk through it in the dark. First was the laundry room. I crossed it quietly, feeling the cold tile under my feet. Then the kitchen. I slowed down there because the floor creaked badly if you stepped in the wrong spots. I had learned where to place my feet over the years, how to move in a way that kept the house quiet. I held my breath as I passed my parents' bedroom door, listening for any sign that I'd woken them. Nothing. I continued into the living room. The living room was large and open, with the dining area just off to one side. The dining table sat close to the path I always took when walking through. There wasn't much space there, just enough to walk by. I'd done it 1,000 times. My bedroom door was right there. I was maybe 6 feet away from it. I could already picture myself reaching it, opening it, grabbing whatever I came for, and getting back to the computer. Everything felt normal, quiet, predictable. And then it happened. A sound exploded into the air right beside my left ear. Not across the room, not down the hallway. Right beside me. It was a shriek. Not a scream like someone startled or angry. Not a yell. A shriek, high, piercing, violent. The kind of sound that rips through your body before your brain even understands what it is. The kind of sound people make when they're in absolute terror or pain. It was so loud and so sudden that my vision blurred instantly. My eyes watered without me choosing to cry. Every muscle in my body locked up at once, then released into pure panic. The worst part wasn't just the sound, it was where it came from. The shriek came from the space right next to my left ear, the side where the dining room table was. There was no room there, no space for a person to stand, no doorway, no shadow, nothing. There was physically nowhere for anyone to be, and yet something had screamed directly into my ear. I didn't turn my head. I didn't look. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted the last few steps to my bedroom like something was chasing me. I slammed the door behind me so hard it rattled the frame. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. My breathing came out in short, sharp gasps that I couldn't control. I grabbed whatever I had come for without even looking at it. To this day, I don't remember what it was. I don't even know why I grabbed it. Part of me thinks I was looking for something to defend myself with, something solid, something that made me feel less exposed. I backed up to the corner of my bed and sat down hard, still facing the door. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I listened. The house was silent, no footsteps, no movement, no voices, no more screaming. Just the same quiet country night I'd known my whole life. Crickets outside. The faint hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the kitchen. The normal sounds of a house at rest. That almost made it worse. I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long. Minutes felt like hours. I kept replaying the sound in my head, trying to understand it, trying to convince myself it had to be something explainable. Maybe my mother had a nightmare. Maybe she screamed in her sleep. But even as I thought that, I knew it wasn't right. Her bedroom was down the hall, behind walls and doors. The sound wouldn't have been right in my ear, and it wouldn't have sounded like that. This was too close, too direct, too precise. Eventually, the adrenaline faded enough that my shaking slowed. I didn't sleep. I don't think I could have, even if I tried. I just sat there until the sky outside my window started to lighten. In the morning, I asked my parents about it. I tried to sound casual. I asked if my mom had woken up screaming that night. I said I thought I heard something and wanted to make sure everything was okay. They both shook their heads. No one had screamed. No one had woken up. No one had heard anything unusual. That answer stuck with me. That was the only strange thing that ever happened in that house. Nothing before it, nothing after it. No footsteps, no voices, no shadows. Just that one moment, that one sound. In some ways, that made it harder to process. If things had kept happening, maybe I could have found a pattern. Maybe I could have told myself the house was old, or the land held memories, or my mind was playing tricks on me because it was late. But there was no pattern, no repeat, just one sudden, violent interruption of normal life. The strangest part is what I did after. After sitting on my bed for a while, after calming down just enough to function, I eventually got up. I opened my door. I stepped back into the hallway. I walked through the living room again, heart pounding, eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing was there. I went back to the guest bedroom and sat down at the computer. And I told my friends what had just happened. I don't know why I did that instead of going to sleep. Maybe I needed to ground myself. Maybe I needed someone else to hear it so it felt real. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I was still in control of my environment. But even as I typed it out, my hands were shaking. That sound stayed with me for a long time. Even now, the thinking about it makes my chest feel tight. I can still hear it if I let myself. That sharp, piercing shriek delivered from a place where nothing should have been able to stand. I've tried to explain it over the years. Maybe it was auditory hallucination brought on by exhaustion. Maybe it was some freak acoustic trick. Sound traveling in a way that made it feel closer than it was. Maybe my brain filled in something terrifying in a moment of vulnerability. But none of those explanations feel complete. Because the fear wasn't delayed. It was instant. My body reacted before my thoughts did. Like some deep, primitive part of me knew. That sound didn't belong there. Like something had crossed a boundary it wasn't supposed to cross. And my instincts recognized it immediately. I've lived in other houses since then. I've walked through dark rooms. I've stayed up late. I've lived alone. I've never heard anything like that again. And maybe that's what makes it stick. Not the idea that something followed me, but the idea that for one moment, something was there. Close enough to scream in my ear, and then it was gone. When this started happening, I didn't immediately think of it as something frightening. At first, it felt more like an annoyance than anything else. Just another strange inconvenience tied to owning a phone. But as time went on, the pattern became harder to ignore, and what once felt mildly irritating slowly turned into something deeply unsettling. This was before I moved out of the country. I had a local phone number and lived a pretty normal, quiet life. Nothing unusual was going on around me. No drama, no major stress. Just work, daily routines, and the usual distractions of everyday life. That's why the phone calls stood out so sharply once they began. They all came from Richmond. That was the first thing I noticed. Every single call traced back to Richmond, even though I had no real connection to the area. I hadn't lived there. I didn't have friends there, didn't do business there, and as far as I knew, had never given my number to anyone or any place in that region. The calls came from a wide variety of numbers, but they always shared that same geographic origin. Sometimes the caller ID would show the name of a business. Other times, it would just be a number. Hardware stores, nursing homes, places I had never heard of and definitely never contacted. There were two very distinct types of calls. The first type seemed almost harmless at first. The first time it happened, I answered the phone without any hesitation. On the other end was a man with a very upbeat, cheerful voice. He sounded friendly, almost overly so. He asked me my name, casually, like this was a normal conversation. I told him my name. There was a brief pause. And then he said he had the wrong number. His tone didn't change. Still cheerful, still polite. He hung up immediately afterward. I didn't think much of it. People dial wrong numbers all the time. I shrugged it off and went about my day, but then he called again, and again, and again. Each time it was the same routine, same upbeat male voice, same casual question asking for my name, same response afterward, telling me he had the wrong number before hanging up. The thing that started to bother me wasn't the repetition, it was the phone numbers. Every time he called, it came from a different number. At first, I assumed it was some kind of call center issue or maybe a misconfigured phone system. But all the numbers were different, and all of them were from Richmond. Some of them were listed as businesses, others weren't. There was no consistency except for the location and the voice. Over the course of a few weeks, I received several calls like this. I started to feel uneasy answering the phone when I didn't recognize the number. Something about it felt off. It didn't feel like someone who was genuinely trying to reach a specific person. It felt rehearsed, mechanical almost. The last time that particular caller contacted me, something changed. When I answered, he didn't ask for my name. He didn't sound confused. He didn't even sound cheerful anymore. He simply said, "I have the wrong number," and hung up. That was it. No explanation, no question, no pause. Just that single sentence delivered flatly, and then silence. After that, I never heard from him again. If that had been the only strange thing, I might have eventually forgotten about it. But it wasn't. The second type of call was far worse. These calls didn't start with a voice at all. When I answered, there would be nothing but a low hiss in the background. It sounded like static, but not the kind you hear from a bad connection. It was constant, like white noise. I would say hello a few times, waiting for someone to speak. Then, after several seconds, a voice would emerge. It was an old man's voice. At least, that's what it sounded like. His voice was low, rough, and shaky, like it took effort for him to speak. He would start mumbling, saying things I could never fully understand. It wasn't one clear sentence or even a recognizable conversation. It sounded like rambling, like someone talking to themselves rather than to another person. The most disturbing part was that he never paused. He would just keep going, mumbling, muttering, drifting from one unintelligible phrase to the next. There were no breaks, no moments where he waited for a response. It was like he wasn't aware I was on the line at all. Every time this happened, I would hang up. I couldn't stand listening to it. The sound of his voice made my skin crawl. It wasn't just confusing, it felt intrusive, like I had accidentally tapped into something I wasn't supposed to hear. Just like with the first type of call, these also came from different numbers every time. And just like before, every number traced back to Richmond. Sometimes the caller ID would show a location tied to a nursing home or some other care facility. Other times it was just a number with no name attached. The frequency of the calls varied. Sometimes I'd go a few days without hearing anything. Other times, I'd get multiple calls in a single week. There was no predictable schedule. That unpredictability made it worse. Every time my phone rang, I felt a small spike of anxiety. I started screening calls more often, letting unfamiliar numbers go to voicemail. But most of the time, no voicemail was left, just missed calls. Silent reminders that someone or something was still dialing my number. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe my number had once belonged to someone else, someone who lived in Richmond, someone who had been contacted by all these places in the past. That would explain why businesses and institutions were calling. It would explain the confusion. It didn't explain the voices. It didn't explain the man who kept asking for my name, or the old man who mumbled endlessly into the receiver, or why every single call came from a different number, or why none of them ever seemed to correct the mistake permanently. I considered changing my number, but for one reason or another, I kept putting it off. Life got busy. The calls, while disturbing, weren't constant enough to completely disrupt my day. I learned to live with them, even though they left me unsettled. They continued right up until the day I moved out of the country. When I left, I canceled that phone number entirely. The calls stopped immediately simply because the number no longer existed. There was no resolution, no explanation, just silence. To this day, I still don't know who those callers were. I don't know how they got my number or why they kept calling from different lines within the same city. I don't know if it was one person using multiple phones, a broken system looping endlessly, or something stranger. All I know is how it made me feel. It felt like my number had been pulled into someone else's life, or maybe several lives, like I was receiving echoes of conversations that weren't meant for me. Each call felt like a reminder that I was connected, however briefly and unwillingly, to something I couldn't see or understand. There was no dramatic climax, no moment where everything clicked into place, just a steady stream of calls, different voices, different numbers, always Richmond. And even now, years later, I still sometimes think about what might have happened if I had answered one of those calls and stayed on the line longer, if I had spoken to the old man, if I had asked more questions, if I had pushed for answers. But part of me is glad I didn't, because whatever was reaching out through that phone, it never felt like it wanted a conversation. It felt like it was simply calling because that's what it had always done. And that, more than anything else, is what made it creepy as all hell. When I was a kid, the thing I hated more than anything else was taking my clothes down to the basement. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then it felt like being asked to walk straight into a nightmare. My job was simple. Carry my clothes downstairs and dump them in a big pile next to the washing machine so my mom could wash them later. That was it. No tricks, no danger, just a chore. But the basement ruined everything. That side of the basement wasn't finished. No drywall, no carpet, no warmth, just concrete floors, exposed beams, pipes running along the ceiling, and shadows that didn't seem to stay still. The light was always wrong down there. Even during the day, it felt dim and heavy, like the basement swallowed whatever light came into it and kept the rest for itself. I was terrified of that place. It wasn't just fear, either. It crawled into my sleep. I had nightmares about the basement constantly, not normal bad dreams that fade when you wake up, but vivid, repeating nightmares that felt more real than being awake. The worst part was that I often knew I was dreaming while it was happening, but I couldn't escape. I was trapped inside the dream, fully aware of what was about to happen, completely powerless to stop it. One nightmare came back more than any other. In it, I would be awake in the house, walking around, completely alone. No parents, no voices, no noise except my own breathing. At some point, I would suddenly realize that it was almost time. I don't know what time it was. I couldn't read a clock or point to a number, but I could feel it in my body, in my bones, like a pressure building in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. Now I knew with absolute certainty that something bad was about to happen. Every time I would panic and run to the kitchen. The door to the basement was in the kitchen, right there against the wall. In the dream, I would crawl under the kitchen table and curl myself up as tightly as I could. I remember the feeling of the cold tile against my knees, my hands pressed over my mouth to keep myself from making any noise. My heart would be racing so hard, it felt like it might give me away. Then the basement door would open. I never saw the door itself open, I just knew it had. I would see the legs of a man step into the kitchen. Only his legs, from the knees down. Dark pants, heavy shoes. I never saw his face. I never knew who he was. But I knew what he was. I knew that if he caught me out in the open, he would do terrible things to me. The worst part wasn't even that. The worst part was knowing that he knew exactly where I was. In the dream, I was always certain of it. He knew I was under the table. He could hear my breathing. He could probably hear my heart pounding. But he didn't rush. He didn't grab me right away. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed knowing how afraid I was, curled up under that table, trying desperately not to be seen or heard. That knowledge was unbearable. Sometimes the dream would end there. Sometimes it would fade into something else. Other times, another nightmare would take over. In that one, I would be walking down the basement stairs. I always knew what was coming. Even before I took the first step, I knew exactly how it would end. I could feel the dread building as I went down each step, my body screaming at me to turn around, to run, to stop. But I couldn't. My legs kept moving on their own. When I stepped off the last stair, the basement would go completely dark, not dim, not shadowy, total darkness. And something would grab me. I can't explain the terror that produced. It was pure, overwhelming panic, the kind that fills your chest and throat and leaves no room for thought. The worst part was that I knew it was going to happen the entire time I was walking down those stairs, and I was completely unable to stop myself. There were other dreams too, different versions, different details, but they all centered around the basement. That place was always the heart of the fear. Even when I was awake, the basement felt wrong, like it was watching me, like it was waiting. I hated the basement. One day I had to take my laundry down like usual. My parents weren't home. It was just me and the dog. I stood at the top of the basement stairs for a long time, holding my clothes, staring down into the dim space below. My chest felt tight, my stomach twisting in on itself. That's when I had an idea. If the dog came with me, it wouldn't be so bad. She was a good dog, big enough to make me feel safer, loyal, always happy to follow me anywhere. I figured that having her down there with me would somehow keep the bad things away, like monsters wouldn't dare show up if a dog was present. So I grabbed my laundry, called the dog over, and headed down the stairs. It was daytime, which helped. Sunlight streamed down through the small slit windows near the ceiling, cutting thin lines of light across the concrete floor. The basement didn't look as terrifying as it usually did. Still creepy, but manageable. I told myself I was being stupid. I walked more confidently than I felt, trying to prove something to myself. I made it to the washing machine. I casually tossed my clothes onto the pile like it was no big deal at all. Like this was just another normal part of my day. I even felt a little proud of myself. See, nothing happened. Then I turned around and started back toward the stairs. That confidence didn't last. No matter how brave I pretended to be, there was one rule I always followed. I never walked up the basement stairs slowly, ever. Once the task was done, I ran. Every time. I didn't care how silly it looked. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. I was a scrawny kid, light on my feet. When I ran up the stairs, you could barely hear my footsteps. I took the first step, then the second, then the third. And suddenly behind me, I heard it. Thudding, scrambling, heavy, frantic movement coming up the stairs right behind me. It was loud, way louder than my own footsteps. It sounded wild and desperate and fast, like something charging upward with full force. The noise filled the stairwell, echoing off the walls, closing in on me. My brain shut down. I didn't think, maybe it's the dog. I didn't think anything at all. Every nightmare I had ever had about that basement slammed into me at once. This was it. This was the moment monsters turned out to be real. This was the moment where everything I had been told was a lie. I screamed. I felt my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My body wouldn't respond anymore. I couldn't keep climbing. I couldn't turn around. My legs gave out completely. I collapsed onto the stairs and curled up into a tight ball, arms over my head, face buried against the steps. I shut my eyes as hard as I could. I genuinely believed I was about to die. Can you imagine that feeling as a kid? Growing up being told monsters aren't real, that there's nothing to be afraid of, and then facing what feels like undeniable proof that your worst nightmare is charging straight at you inside your own home. I didn't try to fight. I didn't try to scream again. I just waited, and then something warm touched my face, a tongue. Wet, sloppy, happy. My dog started licking my face, tail probably wagging like crazy, thrilled to be playing what she clearly thought was an exciting new game called Race You Up the Stairs. I opened my eyes and burst into tears. Not quiet crying, full sobbing, shaking, gasping. I can't breathe crying. The kind that comes from adrenaline crashing all at once. My dog didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She just kept licking me, bouncing around, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just scared the soul out of me. Eventually, I calmed down. I laughed a little too, though it came out shaky and weak. I hugged her and climbed the rest of the way upstairs, still trembling. The basement door closed behind me and the house felt safe again. But that fear never fully went away. Even after I understood what happened, even after I could logically explain it, the basement never stopped feeling wrong. Those nightmares stayed with me for years. The feeling of dread, the sense that something was waiting, the knowledge in the dreams that I was about to face something terrible and couldn't stop it, even now. As an adult, basements still make my skin crawl. I don't like unfinished ones. I don't like walking through them in the dark. I don't like that heavy silence they have. Somewhere deep down, there's still that kid who knows what it feels like to be frozen on the stairs, waiting for something to grab him out of the dark. And even though that day ended with nothing more than a dog who wanted to play, the fear was real. Terrifyingly real, and for a moment it felt like every nightmare I had ever had was finally coming true. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my family lived in a house tucked away in a quiet little neighborhood at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. No through traffic, no noise, no reason to feel unsafe. From the outside, it looked like a perfectly normal family home, the kind you would never expect to carry anything strange with it. The backyard was massive. It stretched farther than most yards in the neighborhood, wide and open, with grass that seemed to go on forever when you were a kid. But in one far corner of that yard, there was something that never felt right. Sitting there was an old, rusted trailer, the flat kind people use to tow dirt bikes or equipment. It was worn down, brown with rust, half sunken into the ground, like it had been abandoned for years. None of us liked that corner of the yard. It didn't matter how bright the sun was or how normal everything else felt. That spot always felt wrong. My sisters and I never played near it. We didn't run past it. We didn't explore it. Even our dog avoided it completely. She would run around the yard freely, chasing toys or birds, but she would always stop short of that corner, turning away like there was an invisible wall there. As kids, we didn't talk about it much. We didn't have the language to explain why it made us uncomfortable. We just knew instinctively that it wasn't a place we wanted to be. Inside the house, things were mostly normal, at least on the surface. My 2 younger sisters shared a bedroom, and I had my own room down the hall. Every now and then, usually late at night, and my sisters would quietly come into my room and ask if they could sleep on the floor or at the foot of my bed. They said they were seeing weird lights in their room. My parents brushed it off. They said it was probably streetlights shining through the window or car headlights passing by. It was a reasonable explanation, and at that age, we accepted it, even if it didn't fully sit right. The street wasn't busy, and the lights my sisters described didn't really match that explanation. Still, none of us pushed the issue. Then there was the night that changed everything for me. I woke up suddenly, in the middle of the night, with a feeling I had never experienced before. It wasn't fear at first. It was anger. Not my own anger, but the sensation of being near someone who was furious. The kind of presence you feel when someone is standing right next to you, absolutely seething even if they haven't said a word. My room was dark, quiet, and still. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a shape standing in my doorway. It looked like a person, just a dark outline against the darkness. Near where its face should have been was a single red glowing light. It looked exactly like the cherry at the end of a cigarette. Both of my parents smoked. In my sleepy, confused state, my brain immediately tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I assumed it was one of them, standing in the doorway, maybe checking on me. I sat up in bed and softly said, "Mom? Dad?" There was no response. The figure didn't move. It didn't shift or react. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, both the shape and the red light were gone. The doorway was empty. The silence felt heavy. A wave of fear rushed over me all at once. I didn't want to look around. I didn't want to move. I yanked the covers up over my head as fast as I could and curled into a tight ball, pressing myself into the mattress, trying to make myself as small as possible. I lay there, heart pounding, listening. That's when I felt it. A tug at the blankets near the bottom of the bed. It wasn't hard at first, just enough to let me know something was there. My breath caught in my throat. I tightened my grip on the covers, pulling them closer to my chest. A moment passed, and then there was another tug, stronger this time. I was terrified. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. Every muscle in my body felt locked in place. All I could do was hold on to the blankets with everything I had, as if that thin layer of fabric was the only thing protecting me. The tugging stopped. I lay there, frozen, afraid that if I moved even slightly, it would start again. Time stretched on in a way that made it impossible to tell how long I was awake. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I must have fallen asleep again. In the morning, I told my parents what had happened. I described the figure, the red light, the tugging at my blankets. They listened, but their expressions were calm, reassuring. They told me they had both been asleep all night. Neither of them had come into my room. They said it must have been a nightmare. I wanted to believe them. As I got older, we moved out of that house. Life went on. For a long time, I didn't think much about it during the day, but at night, in my dreams, the house came back. Years later, well into adulthood, I started having recurring nightmares about that place. They weren't always the same, but they followed similar patterns. The house would appear the way it looked when we lived there, but something was always wrong. The worst part was the garage-turned den at the back of the house. In my dreams, that room looked like a black hole. It was impossibly dark, darker than any shadow should be. Even though the house was only one story in real life, in my dreams, I would be running downstairs toward that den. I knew with absolute certainty that if I went too close to that darkness, something evil would get me. I could feel it waiting. Sometimes in the dreams, I would try to escape the house. I would run to neighboring homes, banging on doors, begging for help. But even in the dreams, I knew that those houses were wrong too. I knew that if I went inside them, I would die. The entire neighborhood felt hostile, like it was all part of the same trap. These dreams followed me for years. I never talked about them much. They felt too strange, too personal. I assumed they were just the result of childhood fears lingering into adulthood. Then one night, many years later, My younger sister and I were talking with our mom about that old house. It came up casually at first, just memories of the neighborhood, the yard, the layout. Then the conversation shifted. My mom mentioned that she used to have nightmares about that house. My sister and I looked at each other. She started describing them. In her dreams, she would be running downstairs into the kitchen. The cupboards would be opening and closing by themselves, slamming loudly. She felt panicked, chased, like something was forcing her forward. She also mentioned seeing a man standing in the den, near the same area where I always saw the black hole in my dreams. My blood ran cold. She was describing details she had no way of knowing. We had never talked about our dreams before. I had never told her what I saw in mine. And yet, the locations matched. The feelings matched. Even the presence matched. All three of us sat there in silence for a moment. It wasn't just one person anymore. It wasn't just a kid's nightmare or an overactive imagination. Three people from the same house across decades had experienced the same patterns of fear, the same locations, the same sense of something being wrong. Needless to say, we were all deeply unsettled. There was no dramatic conclusion, no explanation, no discovery of some tragic history tied to the house. Just shared memories, shared dreams, and a lingering sense that something had followed us long after we left. Even now, when I think back on that house, it isn't the figure in the doorway that scares me the most. It's the consistency, the way the fear showed up in different forms at different ages, to different people, but always tied to the same place. Whatever it was, it didn't need to make itself known often. It only needed to be remembered. When I was a kid, around 10 or maybe 11 years old, something happened that has stayed with me just as strongly as any nightmare I've ever had. Even now, thinking back on it makes my stomach tighten. At the time, I didn't fully understand what I was witnessing, but as I've grown older, the memory has only become more unsettling, not less. My great-grandfather was very old by then, and his health had started to decline quickly. About a month before this happened, his wife, my great-grandmother, had passed away. They had been together for most of their lives, and after she died, it was obvious to everyone in the family that he was no longer the same person. It was like something inside him had shut down. He barely ate, barely slept, and spent most of his time sitting alone in his house, staring off into space. We all knew, without saying it out loud, that he didn't have much time left. There was this quiet understanding in the family that we were in the final stretch. Visits became more frequent. Conversations became softer. Everyone tried to be kind and patient with him, even when he started saying things that didn't make much sense. Not long after my great-grandmother died, my great-grandfather began telling people that he was seeing strange things in his house. At first, he mentioned shadows that didn't belong to anyone. Then he talked about shapes moving where nothing should be moving. Sometimes he would say he saw figures standing in rooms that were empty. No one really believed him. Most of the adults brushed it off as grief, stress, or his age catching up with him. They said he was confused, that losing his wife had shaken him deeply, and that his mind was just trying to cope. I remember overhearing conversations where people would say things like, "He's just imagining things," or "That's what happens when you get that old." No one took him seriously, but he was clearly disturbed by what he was seeing. He wasn't joking about it or telling stories for attention. He looked scared sometimes, genuinely scared, and that always stuck with me. Even as a kid, I could tell there was something different about the way he talked about it. Instead of arguing with anyone or trying to convince them with words, he decided to do something else. My great-grandfather had an old Polaroid camera. It was the kind that printed photos instantly, the kind where you could watch the image slowly appear. One day, he announced that he was going to start taking pictures of the things he was seeing. He said that if no one believed him, he would show them. I remember watching him walk around his house with that camera, carefully pointing it at different corners of rooms, hallways, doorways, and furniture. To everyone else, it probably looked pointless. Most of the photos didn't turn out at all. Some were too dark, some were blurry, and some were just blank-looking images of walls or floors. The adults would shake their heads and quietly confirm their belief that he was just confused. Then there was one photo. I remember the moment clearly, even though I was young. He called everyone over and said he had finally gotten one that worked. The room felt different when he said that, like the air got heavier. He was holding the photo carefully, waiting for it to fully develop. When we all gathered around and looked at it, everything went silent. The picture was of his television. The TV was turned off when the picture was taken, so the screen was black. But on that black screen, there was something visible. At first glance, it looked like a shadow, but it was too defined to be just a shadow. It clearly had a shape that looked like a person, but it wasn't normal. The figure had arms, but the hands were wrong. On each arm, there were 4 distinct fingers, not 5, and the ends of them looked pointed. Not like claws exactly, but sharp enough to feel unnatural. The body was dark, almost like it was made entirely of shadow, but it stood out clearly against the black screen in a way that made no sense. The most disturbing part was above its head. There was something that looked like a halo, but not the kind you see in movies or paintings. It wasn't a simple glowing ring floating above the head. It was shaped almost like a horseshoe, stretching from one shoulder to the other. Inside that shape were perfect triangles, arranged so cleanly and evenly that it didn't look random at all. It looked deliberate, almost precise. The head of the figure wasn't facing forward. It was turned completely sideways to the right, so you could see the outline of its face. Even though there were no clear facial features, you could still tell where the head ended and the neck began. The outline alone was enough to make my skin crawl. I remember staring at that photo, feeling frozen. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how to explain what I was seeing. I just knew it scared me. Everyone else saw it too. My entire family was standing there, looking at the same image. No one laughed. No one brushed it off immediately. There was a long pause, and then my aunt broke the silence by saying, "It looks like a monster." The way she said it wasn't joking or dramatic. It was quiet, almost shocked. I will never forget that moment. Even the adults who had been dismissing my great-grandfather's claims looked uneasy. You could see it on their faces. They didn't know what they were looking at, and for a brief moment, it felt like they were questioning everything they had been saying. My great-grandfather didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't gloat. He just looked tired, almost relieved, like he finally had proof that he wasn't crazy. After that day, things got strange in a different way. A little while later, someone asked my grandmother about the photo. We wanted to see it again. We assumed she had kept it somewhere safe. It felt impossible to imagine that something like that could just be thrown away or lost. When we asked her, she looked genuinely confused. She said she had no idea what we were talking about. At first, we thought she was joking. Then we thought maybe she just didn't remember. But she insisted over and over that there was no photo. She said my great-grandfather never took any pictures like that. She denied the whole thing completely. What made it worse was how serious she was. She wasn't laughing it off or changing the subject. She looked annoyed, even defensive, as if the idea itself bothered her. No matter how much we pressed, she refused to acknowledge that the photo ever existed. That scared me almost as much as the picture itself. I knew what I saw. I knew my family had seen it too. My aunt's reaction alone was proof that it wasn't just in my head. But suddenly, it was like the memory was being erased, at least for some people. Not long after that, my great-grandfather passed away. After his death, The topic was never brought up again. No one talked about the things he claimed to see. No one mentioned the camera or the photo. It was like an unspoken agreement to forget it ever happened. But I couldn't forget. Even now I can see that image clearly in my mind. The dark figure, the pointed fingers, the strange halo with perfect triangles, the sideways head. It's burned into my memory in a way that feels permanent. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that photo still existed, if someone had kept it, if technology today could analyze it or explain it. Other times, I wonder if it's better that it disappeared, like it wasn't meant to stay. What unsettles me the most is that my great-grandfather had been seeing these things before the photo was taken. He was already aware of them. The picture wasn't creating the experience, it was documenting it. I don't know what he was seeing in those final weeks of his life. I don't know if it was grief, something psychological, or something else entirely. But I do know that one image changed the way I look at the world. To this day, I can probably draw it if someone asked me to. The shape is that clear in my head, and sometimes late at night I find myself wondering if what he saw was something waiting for him, or something that noticed him noticing it. Whatever it was, it made sure at least one of us would never forget. About 10 years ago, when I was 19, I was very close friends with a girl who shared my interest in the paranormal. We were the kind of people who stayed up late talking about ghosts, strange experiences, and the possibility that there was more to the world than what we could see. Neither of us approached it from a place of mockery. We were curious, respectful, and genuinely fascinated by the unknown. At some point, she bought a spirit board, not a classic Ouija board, but one marketed under the name Psychic Circle. It was covered in words, symbols, and images, and it came with a small book that explained how to use it and how to interpret responses. We were excited when she got it, imagining all the possibilities. We tried it several times together, usually late at night, sitting on the floor with dim lighting, trying to follow the instructions exactly as written. Nothing ever happened. No movement, no responses, no strange feelings. It always felt quiet and empty. Eventually, we joked that maybe we were doing it wrong, or maybe nothing wanted to talk to us. Still, neither of us felt scared using it. If anything, it felt a little disappointing. One night, though, she took the board over to her aunt's house. Her aunt lived alone and had always been described as a little eccentric, but nothing alarming. According to my friend, that night turned into something completely different. She told me that they had an intense experience using the board, something far beyond anything we had ever felt together. She didn't go into many details at first, just said that it was overwhelming and emotional. After that, her aunt asked if she could keep the board for a few nights so she could use it on her own. My friend agreed, and we made plans to go over that weekend so we could all use it together. That Friday night, we got into the car and headed over to her aunt's house. Almost immediately, I felt something was wrong. It wasn't fear exactly. I had experienced strange things before, and the idea of another paranormal encounter didn't usually scare me. This was different. It was a deep, heavy sense of dread that settled in my chest as soon as I sat down in the car. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just nerves or excitement mixed with anticipation, but the feeling didn't fade as we drove. If anything, it got stronger the closer we got to her aunt's house. By the time we pulled into the driveway, my stomach felt tight, like I had just received terrible news without knowing what it was. The moment I stepped inside the house, the feeling intensified. Her aunt greeted us, but the warmth just wasn't there. I could tell almost instantly that she didn't like me, not in a subtle way either. Her tone was cold, her eyes lingered on me longer than felt comfortable, and there was an edge to everything she said. I couldn't figure out why. I had never met her before, and I had done nothing to offend her. The dread I felt earlier grew heavier, almost suffocating. I tried to brush it off as paranoia. I smiled, made polite conversation, and did my best to be friendly. My friend didn't seem to notice anything unusual at first, which made me question myself even more. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. Then her aunt brought out the board. But the moment I saw it, my heart dropped. It looked nothing like it had before. When my friend first bought it, it had been colorful, clean, and new. Now it looked old, extremely old. The surface was weathered, the colors faded and dull, like it had been left outside in the sun for years. The edges looked worn, and the whole thing had an unnatural, aged appearance that made no sense given how recently it had been purchased. My friend immediately noticed it too. She asked her aunt what had happened to the board. Clearly shocked by how different it looked, her aunt answered casually, almost dismissively, and said that the board had been sweating. That word stuck with me. Sweating, not warped, not damaged, not stained. Sweating. Her aunt placed the board on the table. As she did, she kept glancing at me. Her expression filled with suspicion, almost hostility. By that point, I was terrified. My palms were clammy, my hands shaking slightly, and my heart was pounding in my ears. I felt like I was somewhere I absolutely did not belong. Still, I sat down with them. When it came time to place our hands on the oracle, I reached out, trying to steady myself. The moment my fingers touched it, her aunt snapped, "No!" I pulled my hands back instantly, startled. She looked straight at me and said, "They don't like you. They don't want to answer your questions. I can just tell." The room went completely silent. I didn't know what to say. I felt embarrassed, confused, and deeply unsettled all at once. My friend looked shocked. This behavior was completely out of character for her aunt. She wasn't joking, she wasn't dramatic, she was dead serious. At that point, I just wanted to leave. We didn't stay much longer after that. The atmosphere was unbearable. The dread I had felt earlier had turned into pure fear. My friend was upset as we left. She kept saying that her aunt had never acted like that before. She couldn't explain it. It didn't make sense to her either. Her aunt refused to give the board back. Eventually, I bought my own version of the board, thinking maybe what happened was just a strange coincidence. But I never had any luck with it either. Nothing ever happened. No movement, no responses. It stayed completely silent. After a while, I took that as a sign. I gave it away to some other friends and decided to stop messing with things I didn't fully understand. Even now, thinking back on that night, what unsettles me the most isn't the board itself. It's the feeling. That immediate sense of dread before anything even happened, and the way her aunt looked at me like she knew something I didn't. To this day, I don't know what her aunt experienced while she had that board alone. I don't know what made it change the way it did, and I don't know why, out of everyone there, I was singled out. But whatever was involved that night, it made it very clear that I was not welcome. This is one of those memories that has never faded, no matter how much time has passed or how many times I've tried to explain it to myself in a logical way. I know how it sounds. I know how easy it is to dismiss something like this, especially when it happened to a kid. But I also know what I saw, and more importantly, I know that I wasn't alone when it happened. Around 5 years ago, when I was about 12 years old, my life changed in a big way. My parents, my brother and I moved from the United States to Querétaro, Mexico. It was a huge adjustment. New country, new language, new routines, and a completely different environment from what I had grown up with. Everything felt unfamiliar, and for a while, nothing felt stable. When we first arrived, we didn't have a place of our own, so my grandmother let us stay at her house. What was supposed to be temporary ended up lasting a couple of years before we finally moved out. I loved my grandma, but her house was in a rough neighborhood, not the kind of place where kids played outside freely or where you felt relaxed walking around, especially early in the morning or late at night. Because of that, my mom was very careful about everything. One of the biggest issues was parking. She didn't feel safe leaving the car on the street near the house, so she rented a spot in a guarded parking lot about 2 blocks away. It wasn't ideal, but it was the safest option we had. That meant that every weekday morning, we had the same routine. We would wake up extremely early, usually around 4:30 in the morning. By 5 a.m., we were out the door. It was always dark at that hour, quiet in a way that feels unnatural. Like the world hasn't fully woken up yet. The streets were mostly empty, and the only sounds were distant dogs barking or the occasional car passing far away. Every morning we would walk those 2 blocks together. My mom, me, sometimes my brother, heading toward the parking lot to get the car and then drive to school. We did this so often that it became automatic. I barely thought about it. I just followed her, half asleep, carrying my backpack, waiting for the day to start. Until that one morning, it started like any other. The air was cool, the sky still dark, that deep blue-black color before sunrise. Streetlights cast long shadows that stretched across the sidewalk. I remember feeling tired but calm, just focused on walking and waking up. Then suddenly my mom stopped. Not slowly, not casually. She stopped hard, like something had triggered her instincts instantly. She reached out and put her hand on me, gripping my arm firmly, and whispered for me to be quiet. That alone scared me. My mom wasn't the type to panic over nothing. She was cautious, yes, but also practical. When she told me to be quiet like that, something in her voice told me this wasn't a joke or a drill. Confused, I whispered back, asking what was going on. She didn't answer with words. She just slowly lifted her hand and pointed. About 8 to 10 meters away from us, there was a tree. It wasn't a big tree, but it was thick enough to hide someone behind it. At first, I didn't see anything. My eyes were still adjusting, scanning the shadows, trying to understand what she was pointing at. Then I saw movement. Something peeked out from behind the tree. At first glance, my brain tried to make it into something familiar. A kid, a small person, maybe a homeless child. It popped its head out in a way that almost felt playful, like when a kid hides behind something and leans out to see if you're looking. But immediately I knew it wasn't a kid. What I saw didn't fit. The figure was small, much smaller than an adult, smaller than a teenager. Its head was oddly shaped and the ears were pointed, sticking out in a way that didn't look human at all. Its skin was gray, not pale like a sick person, not shadowed, but genuinely gray like a solid color with no warmth to it. And the eyes. That's the part I can never forget. They were huge compared to the size of its head. Dark, deep, and reflective. They weren't blinking. They weren't moving around nervously. They were just fixed on us, watching. I didn't feel curiosity in that moment. I felt fear. Not screaming panic, but that cold, sinking fear that hits you when your brain realizes something is deeply wrong. I remember my heart starting to pound, my mouth going dry, and my legs feeling weak. The creature didn't fully step out from behind the tree. It just leaned enough for us to see its head and part of its upper body. It felt deliberate, like it wanted to be seen, but only just enough. My mom didn't hesitate. The second she saw it clearly, she grabbed my hand tightly and turned us around. She didn't shout. She didn't run. She just started walking fast in the opposite direction, pulling me with her. Her grip was firm, almost painful, and I could tell she was terrified, but trying to stay controlled. As we turned away, I looked back. I saw the creature move. It didn't walk like a person. It ran, but not in a normal human way. It was fast, low to the ground, and it disappeared in the opposite direction from where we were heading. Within seconds, it was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the street. The rest of the walk was silent. My mom didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We just kept moving until we reached the parking lot. I remember getting into the car, my hands shaking, my mind racing, trying to replay what I had just seen. On the drive to school, I finally asked her what that was. She didn't give me a clear answer. She told me not to talk about it. Not at school, not to anyone else. She said we might have been mistaken, that it was dark, that our eyes could have played tricks on us. But her voice didn't sound convincing. It sounded like she was trying to protect me. Or maybe protect herself. What stuck with me was that she never said I imagined it. She never laughed it off. She never said it wasn't real. For a long time after that, I tried to forget it. I told myself it was just fear, shadows, my imagination filling in the gaps. But the image never went away. The shape of the head, the pointed ears, the size, the eyes, the way it moved. Years passed. About 3 years later, I started getting interested in researching strange sightings and unexplained phenomena. Not because of that experience at first, but because I was curious in general. Late one night, while scrolling through images and stories online, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a picture. It wasn't exactly the same, but it was close enough that my heart started racing. A small gray being, large eyes, pointed features, similar proportions, similar posture. I just stared at the screen. The longer I looked, the more certain I became. This wasn't just similar, it was the same type of being, maybe not the exact same one, but the same kind, the same shape, the same presence I remembered from that early morning in Querétaro. I felt sick. All the feelings I had buried came rushing back. The fear, the confusion, the disbelief. The memory felt suddenly fresh again, like it had happened yesterday instead of years ago. I thought about my mom. I thought about how quickly she reacted, how she told me to be quiet, how she grabbed me and walked away without hesitation, how she never dismissed what we saw outright. That's what convinces me the most. I wasn't alone. This wasn't just a child seeing something strange. An adult saw it too. An adult who had no reason to pretend, no reason to encourage fear, and every reason to deny it if it wasn't real. I know what people will say, that it was an animal, a prank, a trick of the light, a hallucination. I've heard all of it. I've said it to myself over and over, trying to find an explanation that fits. None of them do. Animals don't have faces like that. They don't peek playfully from behind trees. They don't lock eyes with you in that way. Shadows don't run. Imagination doesn't create the same detailed memory in two people at the same time. I can swear on my life that this happened. I'm not saying I know what it was. I'm not saying it was here to hurt us. I'm not saying it came from another planet with certainty. All I know is that it wasn't human, and it wasn't something I've ever seen before or since. Sometimes I wonder how many people have seen things like this and never talked about it. How many moments like mine get buried because they don't fit into the world we're comfortable with. I don't talk about this often. Most people wouldn't believe me anyway. But the memory is still there, clear as day, burned into my mind. That early morning, the empty street, the tree, the small gray figure with the big eyes, and the feeling deep in my gut that for just a few seconds, something was watching us. This story has been told in my family for as long as I can remember, and every time it comes up, the room goes quiet. Not because anyone doubts it, but because there is something about it that feels heavy, even decades later. It isn't dramatic in the way horror movies are. There are no screams, no shadows on the walls, no violent events unfolding in front of anyone's eyes. What makes it unsettling is how calm it is, how gentle, and how precise. My Nan had a very close friend she had known since her nursing days. They had trained together, worked long shifts side by side, and formed one of those bonds that only comes from sharing exhaustion, responsibility, and emotional strain day after day. Even after they both left nursing and went on to have families of their own, they stayed close. Their children grew up, their lives changed. But that friendship stayed. Back when both women had young children who were growing into adulthood, my Nan's friend went through a painful divorce. Her ex-husband didn't take it well at all. He became deeply depressed, isolated, and struggled to cope with his life falling apart. He wasn't a violent or angry man, just a sad one, quiet, withdrawn. The kind of person who carried his pain inward instead of lashing out. One evening, not long after my father was born, that ex-husband rang my Nan. At the time, my Nan had just had a newborn baby, my dad. She was exhausted in the way only new mothers understand. She was breastfeeding, running on broken sleep, and spending most of her time at home. My granddad was working night shifts then. So many evenings she was alone in the house with just the baby and the dog for company. When the phone rang, she answered and recognized his voice immediately. He sounded low, tired, emotionally drained. He told her he was struggling and that he really needed someone to talk to, someone who would listen, someone familiar. My Nan cared deeply about him, both because of her friendship with his ex-wife and because she was simply that kind of person, compassionate, kind. The sort of nurse who never really stopped being a nurse, even after leaving the profession. She wanted to help him, but she couldn't. She explained gently that she had just had a baby, that she was breastfeeding, and that she couldn't leave the house to come and see him. She apologized, told him she wished things were different, and tried to comfort him over the phone as best she could. He was quiet for a moment after she said that. Then he told her he understood. His voice didn't sound angry or upset, just calm. Too calm, maybe. He told her not to worry and said very simply, "I'll see you soon then." They said goodbye, and the call ended. At the time, those words didn't stand out. People say things like that all the time. It sounded like he meant they would talk another day, or that he would visit when things were easier. My Nan didn't think twice about it. That evening went on like any other. The baby needed feeding. The house was quiet. The fire was lit and burning strongly in the living room, filling the space with warmth and the familiar crackle of flames. Outside, the street was calm. Nothing seemed unusual. Sometime around 9 o'clock that night, my Nan heard the front gate open. That gate was important to her. It was old, heavy, and loud. She liked it that way. It made a very distinct noise when it opened and closed, a creak and clang that you couldn't mistake for anything else. When my granddad was working nights and she was alone in the house, that gate gave her a sense of security. If anyone walked up to the house, she would hear it. So when she heard the gate open, she didn't panic. Her first thought was that my granddad must have come home early. Maybe he had forgotten something and needed to grab it. Maybe his shift had been cut short. She stayed seated in her chair, holding the baby, not overly concerned. But then something else happened. The family dog, Ben, suddenly stiffened. Ben was not an aggressive dog. He had been raised around 4 young children and was known for being placid, patient, and gentle. He tolerated being climbed on, pulled at, and played with endlessly by kids without ever showing anger. He wasn't a guard dog. He didn't growl at strangers. He didn't bark without reason. That night he stood up slowly and began to growl. Not a playful sound, not a warning bark. A deep, low growl directed straight at the front door. His body was rigid, his attention fixed. Then he began to bark loudly and urgently as if something was very wrong. My Nan had never seen him behave like that before. She felt confused and uneasy. If someone was at the door, why weren't they knocking? Why was the dog reacting so strongly? She decided she would get up and open the door, if only to tell off some kids messing around with the gate. But when she tried to stand, she couldn't. Her body wouldn't respond. She later described it as being frozen in place, like her muscles simply refused to move. She was fully awake, fully aware, holding her baby, but unable to get up from the chair. Panic didn't set in right away. At first, it was confusion, then fear, and then the cold came. She said it felt like an icy wave washed over her, starting in her chest and spreading outward. Not a normal chill, not the kind you get when a window is open. This was deep, penetrating cold, the kind that settles into your bones. And yet, the fire was burning brightly only a few feet away. The room should have been warm. The dog continued to bark. The front door did not open. No footsteps approached. No knock came. The cold lasted for what she estimated was about 2 minutes. During that time, she still couldn't move, still couldn't speak. She just sat there, frozen, listening to the dog and feeling that unnatural chill wrap around her. Then, slowly, the cold began to fade. As it did, something strange happened. Instead of fear, she felt calm. Not relief exactly, but a deep sense of serenity. The kind of calm that settles over you unexpectedly, like everything is suddenly okay, even if you don't understand why. And then she heard the front gate again, the same sound, the unmistakable creak and clang of it closing. Ben stopped barking. Everything went quiet. She found she could move again. The rest of the night passed without incident. She didn't sleep much, but she didn't feel afraid either. Just thoughtful, puzzled. She didn't wake anyone. She didn't call anyone. She told herself she would mention it to my granddad in the morning. When my granddad returned home from work the next day, she told him what had happened. She explained hearing the gate, the dog's behavior, the cold, and how strange it all felt. She told him the time as best as she could remember, around 9 o'clock. My granddad went quiet. Then he told her he had some terrible news. Her friend's ex-husband had taken his own life the night before. The time of death was estimated to be around 8:50 p.m. My nan's house was about a 10-minute walk from his. The room fell silent as the realization settled in. The phone call earlier that day, the words he had said, "I'll see you soon then." The timing, the gate, the dog, the cold, the calm, the gate closing again. Nothing else ever happened after that. No more strange noises, no repeated events, no lingering presence, just that one night. My nan never claimed to know exactly what it meant. She never said she saw him. She never said she believed in ghosts in the traditional sense, but she never dismissed it either. She was a practical woman, grounded, experienced, not prone to fantasy. She believed that somehow, in whatever way was possible, he had come to say goodbye. What makes the story so powerful isn't just the experience itself, but how consistent it remained. She told it the same way every time. The details never changed. The timing never shifted. The emotions she described stayed the same. Fear at first, then cold, then calm, and the dog. People can argue about imagination, coincidence, or stress, but Ben's reaction is what always gives people pause. Animals don't understand social cues. They don't misinterpret conversations or overthink. They react to what they sense. Ben had never behaved like that before, and he never did again. To this day, my nan insists that she didn't feel threatened that night, just cold, and then peaceful, as if whatever had passed through her home hadn't come with malice or anger, but simply to be acknowledged one last time. It's not a story that ends with fear. It ends with a strange kind of sadness, a reminder that sometimes people don't leave quietly. Sometimes they reach out in the only way they can. And sometimes the people who feel it most aren't the ones who go looking for answers, but the ones who were simply kind when kindness mattered. Whether you believe it was coincidence, grief, or something beyond explanation, the timing alone is enough to make anyone stop and think. And once you do, it's very hard to forget. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. No ads interrupted that, because you asked, and I listened. But keeping this alive takes more than most people realize. Your support, however small, is what keeps the darkness going. Link in description, bio, and first comment. There are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late. Subscribe to Shadow Archives, and if this meant something to you, you already know what to do.